January 13th, 1999. 18-year-old Hae Min Lee leaves Woodlawn High School in Baltimore and disappears. 6 weeks later, her body is found buried in Leakin Park. Her ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Adnan Syed, is arrested and charged with her murder. The case seemed straightforward. A teenage boy kills his ex-girlfriend in a jealous rage. The prosecution had a timeline, they had a witness, and most importantly, they had scientific evidence. Cell phone records that allegedly tracked Adnan's movements on the day of the murder. Cell tower data that supposedly placed him at the burial site in Leakin Park. Expert testimony that explained how cell phone technology could pinpoint a person's location with scientific precision. Adnan Syed was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. For 15 years, he maintained his innocence from behind bars, while the case remained largely forgotten. Then, in 2014, everything changed. The podcast Serial brought Adnan's case to international attention, raising questions about his conviction and the evidence used to secure it. But what Serial uncovered wasn't just prosecutorial misconduct or ineffective counsel. It was something much more disturbing. The scientific evidence that convicted Adnan Syed was fundamentally flawed. The cell tower data that supposedly proved his guilt came with a warning from AT&T, explicitly stating that it was unreliable for determining location. The expert witness who testified about the cell evidence later signed an affidavit saying his trial testimony was incorrect. The timeline that prosecutors used to convict Adnan was contradicted by forensic evidence that showed it was scientifically impossible. The lividity evidence from Hae Min Lee's autopsy told a story that completely contradicted the prosecution's case. Fixed frontal lividity showed that Hae's body had lain flat on her front for hours after death, but she was found buried on her right side. If the prosecution's timeline was correct, this lividity pattern could not have formed. The cell tower evidence that seemed so scientific was actually junk science that should never have been admitted in court. The expert testimony that convinced the jury was based on false information that the expert himself later disavowed. For over 20 years, Adnan Syed was imprisoned based on evidence that was scientifically invalid and a timeline that was forensically impossible. In March 2025, his sentence was finally reduced to time served, and he was released, but only after spending more than 2 decades in prison for a crime that the evidence suggests he didn't commit. Before we examine how junk science and flawed forensic evidence sent an innocent teenager to prison for over 20 years, make sure you're subscribed to the Investigation Room and hit that notification bell right now. Here at the Investigation Room, we investigate cases where bad science, flawed expert testimony, and forensic failures have resulted in wrongful convictions. The Adnan Syed case represents one of the most famous examples of how cell tower evidence was misused in criminal prosecutions, and how experts can provide testimony that directly contradicts the scientific facts. New comprehensive investigations every week, exposing the junk science that others accept without question, and revealing how flawed forensic evidence can destroy innocent lives. Drop a like if you believe criminal convictions should be based on reliable science, rather than misleading expert testimony and prosecutorial theories that ignore forensic evidence. And let me know in the comments what you think about cases where popular podcasts expose scientific fraud in criminal prosecutions. Because what we're about to reveal about the Adnan Syed case will shock you and change how you think about cell phone evidence, expert testimony, and the reliability of forensic timelines. Now, let's examine how junk science kept an innocent man in prison for over 2 decades. Adnan Masood Syed was born on May 21, 1981, to Pakistani immigrant parents who had built a successful life in the Baltimore area. His father, Syed Rahman, worked as an engineer, while his mother, Shamim Syed, was a homemaker who was deeply involved in her children's education and activities. The Syed family was devoutly Muslim and active in their local mosque, and they had high expectations for their children's academic and moral conduct. Adnan was described by teachers and friends as intelligent, charismatic, and popular. Though he sometimes struggled to balance his family's traditional expectations with the typical American teenage lifestyle he wanted to live. At Woodlawn High School, Adnan was a star on the track team, an honor student, and someone who seemed to effortlessly navigate between different social groups. He was well liked by classmates and teachers, and many saw him as destined for success in whatever career he chose to pursue. However, Adnan was also living something of a double life, presenting himself as an obedient Muslim son to his parents, while secretly engaging in activities they would have disapproved of, including dating, smoking marijuana, and staying out late with friends. This tension between his family's expectations and his desire for a typical American teenage experience would later be used by prosecutors as evidence of his capacity for deception and violence. Hae Min Lee was born on October 15, 1980, in South Korea, and immigrated to the United States with her family when she was 12 years old. She was described as intelligent, ambitious, and fiercely independent, with dreams of becoming a journalist or working in television production. Hae was also popular at Woodlawn High School, where she was a varsity athlete, a good student, and someone who had successfully adapted to American culture while maintaining pride in her Korean heritage. She worked part-time at LensCrafters and was planning to attend college, with aspirations of building a career in media or communications. Adnan and Hae began dating in early 1998, when both were juniors at Woodlawn High School. Their relationship was typical of teenage romance in many ways: intense, passionate, and filled with the drama that characterizes young love. However, their relationship was complicated by cultural and religious differences that created stress for both of them. Adnan's parents would have strongly disapproved of him dating anyone, let alone someone who wasn't Muslim, so he had to keep the relationship secret from his family. Hae, meanwhile, was independent and strong-willed, and she sometimes felt constrained by what she perceived as Adnan's possessiveness and jealousy. The relationship lasted for about a year, during which time Adnan and Hae were considered one of the popular couples at school. They attended prom together, exchanged gifts, and seemed genuinely devoted to each other. However, by late 1998, the relationship was becoming strained. Hae was increasingly interested in pursuing her independence and focusing on her future plans, while Adnan seemed to want more commitment and exclusivity than she was prepared to give. The cultural pressures from Adnan's family also created stress, as he struggled to maintain his secret relationship while meeting his parents' expectations for religious observance and academic performance. In December 1998, Hae and Adnan broke up for what would be the final time. The breakup was reportedly initiated by Hae, who had begun dating someone else, Don Kleindienst, who worked with her at LensCrafters. Friends described the breakup as typical teenage drama, with some hurt feelings and awkwardness, but nothing that seemed particularly unusual or threatening. Adnan appeared to accept the breakup and was reportedly dating someone else by January 1999. However, the prosecution would later argue that Adnan never truly accepted the end of his relationship with Hae, and that his jealousy and anger over her new relationship provided the motive for murder. January 13, 1999, was a normal Wednesday at Woodlawn High School. It was also the day that would change multiple lives forever and become the subject of one of the most analyzed criminal cases in recent memory. The weather was cold but clear, and students were settling back into their routines after the winter break. For most people at the school, it seemed like an ordinary day, but by evening, Hae Min Lee would be missing, and a chain of events would be set in motion that would lead to one of the most controversial murder convictions in modern American criminal justice. According to the timeline that would later be established by investigators, Hae's last class ended around 2:15 p.m., and she was supposed to pick up her 6-year-old cousin from elementary school by 3:15 p.m. This timeline created a narrow window during which something happened to Hae, and this window would become crucial to the prosecution's case against Adnan Syed. The prosecution would argue that Adnan somehow convinced Hae to give him a ride after school, that he killed her during this ride, and that he then spent the afternoon and evening disposing of her body and covering up the crime. The prosecution's timeline relied heavily on the testimony of Jay Wilds, a friend of Adnan's, who claimed to have helped him bury Hae's body in Leakin Park. According to Jay's account, Adnan had strangled Hay in the parking lot of a Best Buy store sometime around 3 p.m., had called Jay to help him, and had then spent the evening moving Hay's body and burying it in a shallow grave in the park. Jay's testimony was problematic because he changed his story multiple times during police interviews, and his account contained numerous inconsistencies, but it provided the basic framework for the prosecution's case. However, there were significant problems with the prosecution's timeline from the beginning. Friends and classmates reported seeing Hay at school after 2:15 p.m., suggesting that she may not have left immediately after her last class. There was no clear evidence that Adnan had asked Hay for a ride, and some witnesses reported that Hay had said she couldn't give anyone a ride because she had something else to do after school. The timing was also extremely tight. For the prosecution's theory to be correct, Adnan would have had to convince Hay to give him a ride, kill her, call Jay, and begin the process of disposing of her body, all within about an hour. Most importantly, the prosecution's timeline was contradicted by physical evidence that wouldn't be properly analyzed until years later. The lividity patterns on Hay's body told a story that was completely inconsistent with the prosecution's claim that she had been killed around 3 p.m. and buried that evening. Instead, the forensic evidence suggested a timeline that was fundamentally different from what the prosecution presented to the jury. This evidence should have created reasonable doubt about Adnan's guilt, but it was either ignored or misunderstood during the original investigation and trial. The cell phone evidence that would become central to Adnan's conviction was also collected on January 13th, when police obtained records of calls made from Adnan's newly acquired cell phone. These records showed the times and durations of calls, as well as which cell towers the phone had connected to during each call. The prosecution would later use this data to argue that they could track Adnan's movements throughout the day and prove that he had been in Leakin Park during the time when they claimed Hay was being buried. However, this use of cell tower data was based on fundamental misunderstandings of how the technology worked and ignored explicit warnings from the phone company about the reliability of the data. The investigation into Hae Min Lee's disappearance began on January 13th, when she failed to pick up her cousin from school, and her family couldn't locate her. Initially, police treated the case as a missing person investigation, interviewing Hae's friends and family to determine when she was last seen and whether there were any obvious explanations for her disappearance. However, as days passed without any sign of Hae, investigators began to suspect that something more serious had happened to her. The investigation took a significant turn when Jay Wilds came forward to police with claims that Adnan Syed had killed Hae and that he had helped dispose of her body. Jay's initial interview with police was conducted without recording, and the written notes from this interview were later destroyed, making it impossible to verify exactly what Jay originally told investigators. However, subsequent recorded interviews revealed a story that would become the foundation of the prosecution's case. Adnan had strangled Hae, had called Jay for help, and had spent the evening burying her body in Leakin Park. The problem was that Jay's story was inconsistent from the beginning and changed significantly over the course of multiple interviews. Details about timing, locations, and sequences of events varied between interviews, and Jay seemed to modify his account based on information that police provided to him during questioning. Some critics would later argue that Jay's testimony appeared to be coached by investigators who were trying to build a case against Adnan rather than objectively determining what had happened to Hae. The investigation was also compromised by tunnel vision that focused exclusively on Adnan as the primary suspect, while failing to adequately investigate other possibilities. Police didn't thoroughly examine Hae's new boyfriend, Don Kleindienst, despite the fact that he was one of the last people to have contact with her. They didn't explore the possibility that Hae might have been killed by a stranger or in connection with some other aspect of her life. Instead, they focused on building a case against Adnan based on Jay's testimony and the cell phone evidence. The cell phone evidence became crucial to the prosecution's case because it appeared to provide objective, scientific corroboration for Jay's claims about Adnan's movements on January 13th. Investigators obtained records from Adnan's cell phone provider, showing which cell towers his phone had connected to during calls made throughout the day. An FBI expert, Abraham Waranowitz, was brought in to explain how cell tower data could be used to determine the approximate location of a phone when calls were made. His testimony suggested that the phone had been in Leakin Park during the evening hours when Jay claimed they were burying Hayes' body. However, the use of cell tower data in this way was problematic for several reasons that weren't fully understood at the time of the trial. First, cell tower data is much less precise than investigators and the expert witness suggested, and it cannot pinpoint a phone's location with the kind of accuracy that was implied during the trial. Second, there are numerous factors that can affect which tower a phone connects to, including network traffic, signal strength, and tower maintenance, meaning that tower data alone cannot reliably determine location. Most importantly, the phone company had explicitly warned that certain types of call data were unreliable for location purposes, but this warning was ignored during the investigation and trial. The cornerstone of the prosecution's case against Adnan Syed was cell phone tower evidence that they claimed could track his movements throughout January 13, 1999, and prove that he had been in Leakin Park when Hae Min Lee was allegedly buried. FBI expert Abraham Waranowitz testified that by analyzing which cell towers Adnan's phone had connected to during calls, they could determine his approximate location at various times throughout the day. This testimony appeared to provide scientific, objective evidence that corroborated Jay Wilde's claims about Adnan's involvement in the murder and burial. The prosecution's use of cell tower evidence was based on the theory that a cell phone will always connect to the tower that provides the strongest signal, which is usually the closest tower to the phone's location. According to this theory, investigators could work backward from the tower data to determine where the phone had been when each call was made. The FBI expert testified that 2 calls made from Adnan's phone around 7 p.m. on January 13th had connected to a tower that covered the area where Hayes' body was later found, suggesting that Adnan had been in Leakin Park at the time Jay claimed they were burying the body. However, this use of cell tower data was fundamentally flawed and was based on misunderstandings of how cell phone networks actually operate. Cell phones don't always connect to the nearest tower, and there are numerous factors that can cause a phone to connect to a tower that isn't the closest one to its actual location. Network traffic, signal interference, tower maintenance, and even weather conditions can all affect which tower a phone connects to. This means that tower data alone cannot reliably determine a phone's location, especially not with the precision that was claimed during Adnan's trial. More importantly, AT&T had explicitly warned that certain types of call data were unreliable for location purposes. The cell phone records that were used in Adnan's case included a fax cover sheet from AT&T that contained a crucial disclaimer. Outgoing calls only are reliable for location status. Any incoming calls will not be reliable information for location. This warning directly contradicted the prosecution's use of the evidence, because the 2 calls that allegedly placed Adnan in Leakin Park were incoming calls, not outgoing calls. The significance of this disclaimer cannot be overstated. The phone company that generated the data was explicitly stating that incoming calls could not be used to determine location, yet incoming calls were central to the prosecution's case. The 2 calls that supposedly proved Adnan was in Leakin Park were both incoming calls, which AT&T had warned were unreliable for location purposes. This warning should have prevented the cell tower evidence from being used at all, but it was either ignored or not properly understood by the investigators, prosecutors, and defense attorneys involved in the case. Abraham Waranowitz, the FBI expert who testified about the cell tower evidence, later stated that he was not shown the AT&T disclaimer before or during his testimony. In a 2015 affidavit, Waranowitz said that if he had been aware of the disclaimer, it would have significantly altered his testimony and conclusions. He acknowledged that his trial testimony about incoming calls was based on incomplete information and that the reliability disclaimer called into question the fundamental basis of his analysis. The revelation of the AT&T disclaimer and Waranowitz's subsequent affidavit completely undermined the scientific foundation of Adnan's conviction. The cell tower evidence that had seemed so compelling and objective was revealed to be based on false premises and incomplete information. The expert testimony that had convinced the jury was later disavowed by the expert himself. This wasn't just a matter of competing interpretations of ambiguous evidence. It was a case where the prosecution had used evidence in a way that directly contradicted the warnings from the company that generated the data. Asterisk asterisk. The lividity evidence that destroys the timeline. Asterisk asterisk. Beyond the problems with the cell tower evidence, the prosecution's case against Adnan Syed was also contradicted by forensic evidence from Hae Min Lee's autopsy that was either ignored or misunderstood during the original investigation and trial. The lividity patterns on Hae's body told a clear story about what had happened to her after death, but this story was completely inconsistent with the timeline and sequence of events that prosecutors presented to the jury. When properly understood, the lividity evidence suggested that the prosecution's entire theory of the case was scientifically impossible. Lividity, also known as livor mortis, is the pooling of blood in the lower portions of a deceased person's body due to gravity. After death, the heart stops pumping blood, and gravity causes the blood to settle in whatever parts of the body are lowest. This process creates a distinctive pattern of discoloration that can provide important information about the position of the body for several hours after death. Lividity typically becomes fixed after 8 to 12 hours, meaning that the pattern will remain even if the body is subsequently moved to a different position. The autopsy report on Hae Min Lee documented that she had fixed frontal lividity, meaning that the blood had pooled on the front anterior surface of her body, and that this pattern had become permanent. This finding indicated that Hae's body had been lying face down, flat on her front, for many hours after her death. The lividity was described as fixed, meaning that it had been established for at least 8 to 12 hours and would not change even if the body were moved to a different position. However, when Hae's body was discovered in Leakin Park on February 9, 1999, she was found buried on her right side, not lying face down. This created a fundamental contradiction between the autopsy findings and the position in which the body was discovered. If Hae had been buried on her right side shortly after her death, as the prosecution claimed, then the lividity should have been on her right side, not on her front. The fact that she had fixed frontal lividity while being found on her right side proved that she had lain in a different position for many hours before being moved to the burial site. This lividity evidence completely contradicted the prosecution's timeline, which claimed that Hae had been killed around 3 p.m. on January 13th and buried that same evening around 7 p.m. If this timeline were correct, Hae's body would have been moved to the burial site just 4 hours after her death, which would not have been enough time for frontal lividity to become fixed. The forensic evidence showed that Hae's body had to have remained lying face down for at least 8 to 12 hours after death before being moved to the burial site where she was found on her right side. The implications of the lividity evidence were enormous for the prosecution's case. If Hae's body had lain face down for 8 to 12 hours before being moved to the burial site, then she could not have been buried on the evening of January 13th, as the prosecution claimed. Instead, the forensic evidence suggested that she had been killed, had lain somewhere else, probably indoors and on a flat surface, for most of the day and night, and had then been moved to Leakin Park sometime on January 14th or later. This timeline made it impossible for Adnan to have been involved in the burial, because he was in school and accounted for throughout January 14th. The lividity evidence should have been central to Adnan's defense, but it was either not properly understood or not adequately presented during his trial. The defense attorneys apparently didn't consult with forensic experts who could have explained the significance of the lividity findings and how they contradicted the prosecution's timeline. This failure represented a significant deficiency in Adnan's legal representation, as the lividity evidence could have created reasonable doubt about his involvement in the crime. Abraham Waranowitz was an FBI special agent who specialized in cellular technology and was brought in as an expert witness to explain the cell tower evidence in Adnan Syed's case. At the time of the trial, Waranowitz was considered one of the leading experts in cell phone technology and had testified in numerous criminal cases about how cell tower data could be used to track the movements of suspects. His testimony in Adnan's case was crucial to the prosecution's argument that they could prove Adnan's location on January 13th through objective, scientific analysis of his phone records. During his trial testimony, Woranowicz explained how cell phone networks operate and how tower data could be used to determine the approximate location of a phone when calls are made. He testified that by analyzing which towers Adnan's phone had connected to throughout the day, investigators could track his movements and verify or contradict Jay Wilde's claims about their activities. Most importantly, he testified that 2 incoming calls made to Adnan's phone around 7 p.m. had connected to a tower that covered the area of Leakin Park, supporting Jay's claim that they had been burying Hayes' body at that time. Woranowicz's testimony appeared to provide objective, scientific corroboration for the prosecution's case. Unlike Jay's testimony, which was inconsistent and came from someone with obvious credibility problems, the cell tower evidence seemed to offer impartial, technological proof of Adnan's movements. The FBI expert's impressive credentials and technical expertise gave weight to his conclusions, and the jury appeared to find his testimony compelling and convincing. However, Woranowicz's testimony was based on incomplete information that he wasn't provided during his preparation for trial. Specifically, he was not shown the AT&T fax cover sheet that warned that incoming calls were unreliable for location purposes. This disclaimer was crucial because it directly contradicted the methodology he used and the conclusions he reached about the 2 incoming calls that allegedly placed Adnan in Leakin Park. When the AT&T disclaimer was discovered years later during post-conviction proceedings, Woranowicz was contacted and asked to review the information that had not been provided to him during the original trial. His response was immediate and unequivocal. The disclaimer would have fundamentally changed his analysis and testimony. In a 2015 affidavit, Woranowicz stated that if he had been aware of the AT&T warning about incoming calls, it would have significantly altered his testimony. Woranowicz explained that the disclaimer indicated that incoming calls could not be used to determine location in the way that he had testified during the trial. He acknowledged that his analysis had been based on the assumption that both incoming and outgoing calls were equally reliable for location purposes, but the AT&T warning made it clear that this assumption was incorrect. The 2 calls that formed the basis for his conclusion that Adnan had been in Leakin Park were both incoming calls, which AT&T had explicitly stated were unreliable for location determination. The expert's change of position completely undermined the scientific foundation of Adnan's conviction. Woranowicz wasn't just saying that his original testimony might have been wrong, or that there were alternative interpretations of the data. He was saying that his testimony was based on false premises, and that he would not have reached the same conclusions if he had been provided with complete and accurate information. This wasn't a case of evolving scientific understanding or new technology revealing problems with old methods. It was a case where critical information had been withheld from the expert witness, leading to fundamentally flawed testimony. Adnan Syed's case remained largely unknown outside of Baltimore until 2014, when journalist Sarah Koenig began investigating his story for a podcast called Serial. The podcast, which was produced by the creators of This American Life, spent an entire season examining Adnan's case in unprecedented detail, interviewing participants, reviewing evidence, and raising questions about the reliability of his conviction. Serial became a cultural phenomenon, attracting millions of listeners and bringing national attention to what had previously been an obscure criminal case. Koenig's investigation revealed numerous problems with the original case that had not been adequately explored during the trial or appeals process. She interviewed Jay Wildes and found that his story continued to be inconsistent and contained details that seemed implausible or contradicted by other evidence. She examined the cell tower evidence and discovered the AT&T disclaimer that had not been properly considered during the trial. She interviewed legal experts, forensic specialists, and other people involved in the case, building a comprehensive picture of how the investigation and prosecution had been conducted. The podcast's impact went far beyond entertainment value. Serial demonstrated how new investigative techniques and fresh perspectives could reveal problems with criminal cases that had previously seemed settled. The podcast showed how tunnel vision during investigations could lead to wrongful convictions and how inadequate legal representation could prevent important evidence from being properly presented to juries. Most importantly, it showed how supposedly objective scientific evidence could be fundamentally flawed when it was based on incomplete information or misunderstood technology. The success of Serial also sparked broader interest in criminal justice reform and wrongful convictions. The podcast attracted listeners who had never been interested in true crime or legal issues, and it educated them about problems with the criminal justice system that they might not have been aware of. The case became a symbol of how media attention could shine light on potential injustices and create pressure for legal system reform. However, the podcast also faced criticism from some observers who argued that it presented a one-sided view of the case and unfairly portrayed Adnan as a victim of wrongful conviction. Prosecutors and some law enforcement officials maintained that the evidence against Adnan was solid and that the podcast ignored or downplayed evidence of his guilt. The case became controversial, with passionate supporters on both sides arguing about Adnan's innocence or guilt based on their interpretation of the evidence presented in the podcast. Following the attention generated by Serial, Adnan Syed's legal team launched a series of post-conviction proceedings aimed at overturning his conviction based on the newly discovered problems with the cell tower, evidence, and other issues with his original trial. These proceedings focused on two main arguments: that the cell tower evidence was unreliable and should not have been admitted, and that Adnan's original defense attorney had provided ineffective counsel by failing to investigate and present crucial evidence that could have supported his defense. The ineffective counsel claim was based on the failure of Adnan's original attorney, Cristina Gutierrez, to contact Asia McClain, a potential alibi witness who claimed to have seen Adnan at the library during the time when the prosecution alleged he was killing Hay. McClain had written letters to Adnan offering to testify on his behalf, but Gutierrez never contacted her or investigated her potential testimony. The defense also argued that Gutierrez had failed to adequately challenge the cell tower evidence and had not consulted with experts who could have explained its limitations. The post-conviction proceedings revealed additional problems with Adnan's original trial that had not been apparent at the time. The AT&T disclaimer about incoming calls was discovered and presented to the court, along with Abraham Waranowitz's affidavit, stating that his testimony would have been different if he had been aware of the disclaimer. Expert testimony was presented about the Lividity evidence and how it contradicted the prosecution's timeline. New analysis of Jay Wilde's testimony highlighted the numerous inconsistencies and changes in his story that should have raised questions about his credibility. In 2016, a Maryland judge granted Adnan's petition for post-conviction relief, ruling that his original attorney had provided ineffective counsel and that he deserved a new trial. The judge found that Gutierrez's failure to contact Asia McClain had prejudiced Adnan's defense and that the cell tower evidence issues raised additional questions about the reliability of his conviction. However, this victory was short-lived, as the state appealed the decision and Adnan remained in prison while the appeals process continued. The case continued to work its way through the appellate courts for several more years, with various judges reaching different conclusions about the significance of the evidence and whether Adnan deserved a new trial. The legal process was complicated by the fact that post-conviction relief requires meeting very high legal standards, and courts are generally reluctant to overturn convictions unless there is clear evidence of fundamental errors that affected the outcome of the trial. Throughout this process, Adnan remained in prison, serving a life sentence for a crime that he continued to maintain he had not committed. The legal battles attracted continued media attention and public interest, with supporters arguing that he was clearly innocent, while critics maintained that he was a convicted killer trying to escape justice through legal technicalities. The case became a symbol of broader debates about wrongful convictions, the reliability of forensic evidence, and the difficulty of correcting errors in the criminal justice system. The breakthrough in Adnan Syed's case came not from the appeals process, but from a motion filed by Baltimore prosecutors in 2022, requesting that his conviction be vacated due to newly discovered evidence and problems with the original investigation. The Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office conducted a year-long review of the case and concluded that there were serious questions about Adnan's guilt and that the conviction could not stand in light of the evidence, problems that had been identified. The prosecutor's motion highlighted several key issues that had undermined confidence in Adnan's conviction. First, they acknowledged that the cell tower evidence was unreliable and should not have been used to establish Adnan's location on January 13th. The AT&T disclaimer and Waranowitz's subsequent affidavit had made it clear that the scientific foundation of the conviction was fundamentally flawed. Second, they noted that there were other potential suspects who had not been adequately investigated during the original case, and that new evidence had raised questions about whether the investigation had been thorough and objective. Most significantly, the prosecutor's motion revealed that there were Brady violations in the original case, evidence that should have been disclosed to the defense but had been withheld by prosecutors. This evidence included information about alternative suspects and other details that could have supported Adnan's defense if they had been available during the original trial. The discovery of these violations meant that Adnan had been convicted without access to evidence that could have changed the outcome of his case. In September 2022, a Baltimore judge granted the prosecutor's motion and vacated Adnan's conviction, ordering his immediate release from prison after more than 23 years of incarceration. However, this was not a complete exoneration. The charges against Adnan were dropped without prejudice, meaning that prosecutors could potentially refile them if new evidence emerged. Adnan was released, but remained in a legal limbo where his innocence had not been definitively established, even though his conviction had been overturned. The case took another turn in March 2023, when the Maryland Court of Appeals reinstated Adnan's conviction, ruling that the original judge had not followed proper procedures in vacating it, and that the victim's family had not been given adequate opportunity to participate in the hearing. This decision sent Adnan back to legal uncertainty, as he remained free while his conviction was technically reinstated, and the case continued to work through the courts. Finally, in March 2025, Adnan's legal saga came to an end when his sentence was reduced to time served, and he was officially released without the possibility of the charges being refiled. This resolution came after years of legal battles and represented an acknowledgement that the original conviction had been based on flawed evidence and inadequate investigation. While it was not a complete declaration of innocence, it represented the end of a case that had become one of the most famous examples of potential wrongful conviction in modern American criminal justice. The Adnan Syed case represents much more than one potentially wrongful conviction. It highlights systemic problems with how scientific evidence is used in criminal trials, and how expert testimony can mislead juries when it is based on incomplete or inaccurate information. The cell tower evidence that seemed so compelling and objective was actually based on fundamental misunderstandings of how the technology works, and the expert testimony that convinced the jury was later disavowed by the expert himself. The problems with cell tower evidence in Adnan's case are part of a broader pattern of issues with technological evidence in criminal cases. Cell phone location data, GPS tracking, computer forensics, and other forms of digital evidence are often presented to juries as infallible and precise, when in reality they involve significant limitations and potential for error. The complexity of modern technology makes it difficult for judges, attorneys, and jurors to evaluate the reliability of technical evidence, creating opportunities for misuse and misinterpretation. The AT&T disclaimer that was ignored in Adnan's case illustrates how crucial information can be overlooked or misunderstood during criminal investigations. The phone company had explicitly warned that certain types of data were unreliable for location purposes, but this warning was not properly communicated to the expert witness or considered during the trial. This type of communication failure is common in cases involving technical evidence, where important limitations or caveats may be buried in documentation that is not carefully reviewed by legal professionals. The case also highlights problems with expert testimony and how experts can provide misleading information even when they are trying to be helpful and accurate. Abraham Waranowitz was not deliberately trying to mislead the jury, but his testimony was based on incomplete information that led to incorrect conclusions. This illustrates the importance of ensuring that expert witnesses have access to all relevant information and that they understand the limitations of their analysis before testifying in criminal cases. The lividity evidence that contradicted the prosecution's timeline demonstrates another common problem in criminal cases. the failure to properly analyze and present forensic evidence that could support the defense. The autopsy findings clearly showed that the prosecution's timeline was impossible, but this evidence was either not understood or not effectively communicated during the trial. This type of oversight is particularly problematic in cases where defendants cannot afford expert witnesses to challenge prosecution theories. The Adnan Syed case offers several important lessons for improving the criminal justice system and preventing future wrongful convictions. First, it demonstrates the need for better standards and oversight for expert testimony, particularly in cases involving technical evidence that may be difficult for legal professionals to understand. Courts need better mechanisms for evaluating the reliability of scientific evidence and ensuring that expert witnesses have access to complete and accurate information. Second, the case highlights the importance of thorough investigation and the dangers of tunnel vision in criminal cases. The original investigation focused exclusively on building a case against Adnan, while failing to adequately explore other possibilities or critically examine the evidence against him. This type of confirmation bias is common in criminal investigations and can lead to wrongful convictions when investigators become convinced of a suspect's guilt and stop looking for evidence that might contradict their theory. Third, the case illustrates the need for better legal representation in criminal cases, particularly in complex cases involving technical evidence. Adnan's original defense attorney failed to adequately challenge the cell tower evidence, failed to contact potential witnesses, and failed to present crucial forensic evidence that could have supported his defense. These failures highlight the importance of ensuring that defendants have access to qualified attorneys and expert witnesses who can effectively challenge prosecution claims. Fourth, the case demonstrates the value of investigative journalism and public attention in uncovering problems with criminal convictions. The Serial podcast brought expertise and resources to bear on Adnan's case that had not been available during the original trial and appeals process. This type of external scrutiny can be valuable for identifying problems with criminal cases that might otherwise go unnoticed. But it also raises questions about whether justice should depend on media attention and public interest. Finally, the case highlights the difficulty of correcting errors in the criminal justice system once convictions have been obtained. Even with clear evidence of problems with the original trial, it took more than a decade of legal battles to secure Adnan's release, and his case was only resolved after prosecutors themselves acknowledged the problems with the conviction. The legal system needs better mechanisms for identifying and correcting wrongful convictions, particularly in cases where new evidence or advancing science reveals problems with older cases. Despite Adnan Syed's release and the acknowledgement that his conviction was based on flawed evidence, the question of who killed Hae Min Lee remains officially unsolved. The problems with the cell tower evidence and timeline don't necessarily prove that Adnan is innocent. They only prove that the prosecution failed to prove his guilt with reliable evidence. However, the combination of unreliable scientific evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, and alternative explanations for the forensic findings has created reasonable doubt about Adnan's involvement in the crime. The Lividity evidence suggests that whoever killed Hae had access to a location where her body could lie undisturbed for many hours before being moved to the burial site. This points away from a spontaneous killing by a teenage ex-boyfriend and towards someone with more planning and resources. The unresolved questions about the investigation, including the failure to thoroughly examine other potential suspects, mean that the real killer may have escaped justice while an innocent person spent more than 2 decades in prison. The case has also raised questions about Jay Wilde's role and motivations that have never been fully resolved. Jay's inconsistent testimony and apparent cooperation with police have led some observers to speculate that he may have been more involved in the crime than he admitted, or that he may have been pressured to implicate Adnan to protect himself or others. However, Jay has maintained his basic story about Adnan's involvement despite the inconsistencies, and his motivations for lying or telling the truth remain unclear. The failure to properly investigate other potential suspects during the original case means that there may be evidence or leads that were never pursued and that could potentially identify the real killer. However, the passage of more than 25 years since the crime occurred makes it unlikely that a new investigation would be successful in resolving the case. Physical evidence may have been lost or degraded, witnesses' memories have faded, and potential suspects may have died or moved away. The Adnan Syed case represents one of the most prominent examples of how junk science and flawed expert testimony can result in wrongful convictions that persist for decades. The cell tower evidence that seemed so scientific and objective was actually based on fundamental misunderstandings of the technology and ignored explicit warnings from the phone company about its reliability. The expert testimony that convinced the jury was later disavowed by the expert himself when he learned that he had been provided with incomplete information. The timeline that prosecutors used to secure the conviction was contradicted by forensic evidence that proved it was scientifically impossible. For more than 23 years, Adnan Syed maintained his innocence while serving a life sentence based on evidence that was scientifically invalid and expert testimony that was fundamentally flawed. The cell tower data that allegedly tracked his movements was unreliable for location purposes, according to the company that generated it. The lividity evidence from the autopsy proved that the prosecution's timeline was impossible, but this evidence was ignored or misunderstood during the trial. The investigation was compromised by tunnel vision that focused on building a case against Adnan while failing to adequately explore other possibilities. The case became famous through the Serial podcast, which demonstrated how investigative journalism could uncover problems with criminal convictions that had been missed by the legal system. The podcast brought new attention to issues with forensic evidence, expert testimony, and wrongful convictions, educating millions of listeners about problems with the criminal justice system that they might not have been aware of. However, it also sparked controversy about the role of media in criminal cases and whether public attention should influence legal outcomes. Adnan Syed's eventual release in 2025 came only after prosecutors themselves acknowledged that his conviction was based on flawed evidence and inadequate investigation. The case required more than a decade of post-conviction litigation and unprecedented media attention to correct an injustice that should have been apparent from the forensic evidence. This delay highlights the difficulty of correcting errors in the criminal justice system and the need for better mechanisms to identify and address wrongful convictions. The Adnan Syed case serves as a warning about the dangers of accepting scientific evidence at face value without understanding its limitations and potential for error. Cell tower data, like many other forms of technological evidence, can be valuable for criminal investigations when used properly, but it can be misleading and dangerous when misapplied or misunderstood. The case shows how expert witnesses can provide fundamentally flawed testimony, even when they are trying to be helpful and accurate, and how crucial information can be overlooked or ignored during criminal investigations. Most importantly, the case demonstrates that forensic evidence must be carefully analyzed and understood, rather than simply accepted because it appears scientific or objective. The lividity evidence that contradicted the prosecution's timeline was available from the beginning of the case, but it was not properly analyzed or presented during the trial. The AT&T disclaimer that undermined the cell tower evidence was included with the phone records, but it was ignored or not understood by the legal professionals involved in the case. These failures highlight the need for better scientific literacy among legal professionals and more rigorous standards for forensic evidence in criminal cases. Thank you for watching this investigation into one of the most famous examples of how junk science can result in wrongful conviction. If you believe that criminal convictions should be based on reliable scientific evidence, rather than flawed expert testimony and prosecutorial theories that ignore forensic facts, subscribe to the Investigation Room right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into cases where bad science has destroyed innocent lives. Share this video with anyone who wants to understand how technological evidence can be misused in criminal cases. And let me know in the comments, do you think Adnan Syed was innocent? And what does his case teach us about the reliability of expert testimony? The cell tower evidence that convicted Adnan Syed was scientifically invalid, but it took 23 years and a podcast to reveal the truth. Science doesn't lie, but people can misuse science to convict the innocent while the real killers escape justice.